Good evening, everybody. It is Tuesday, October 1st, and today I wanted to discuss my pepper plants and how I brought them back from the brink of death. And I'm being serious when I say that. You wouldn't know it by looking at them, but I had a really rough year for peppers. We had a very, very hot August and July this year, and I live on the southern coast of North Carolina, so our summers are very oppressive and humid. And by the time August rolled around, my pepper crop was pretty much done. They were covered in blight and leaf spot. They were mostly defoliated. There were very few green leaves left. What leaves were there were very yellow and pretty ugly. The plants were beat up and there was barely a pepper or a flower left on them. I've been growing peppers for a long time, and what I learned during that time is that they are very, very vigorous plants, and they can be rescued from the brink of death if you know what you're doing. Because they are so tough and they are so hardy, even when they're completely defoliated and looking sick, they sometimes can be refreshed. So rather than start a new garden for the fall, I decided to try and rescue the existing plants, because while they did look sick, they had a very, very strong and well-defined root system. They were planted back in April, or late March actually, and they've been in this bed for a long time, and most of the roots, most of the soil down here is actually pepper roots. You can see how they run all along the surface, so I felt it would be a waste to try and waste that really strong root structure. So what I tried to do was resurrect them from the brink of death, and I wanted to take this time and teach you how I accomplished that. Here in southeastern coastal North Carolina, the disease pressure is very, very high in our hot and oppressively humid summers. On top of that, because we're by the coast, we have extreme pressure from pests, especially things like stink bugs, shield bugs, leaf hoppers, leaf-footed bugs. They're all very rough and they spread a lot of disease throughout the garden. To make things worse, in early September, I also had Hurricane Dorian rip through the area, and we had some 60+ mile-an-hour wind gusts that did a lot of damage to my crop. What I'm going to do is I'm going to overlay a video on top of these that I took the day after Hurricane Dorian left the area. And in this video overlay, you can clearly see how bad the damage was to my pepper plants. Most of them were pushed over, and you can clearly see that after they were knocked over by the storm, there's barely a pepper on them. In fact, I had to come out the next day and I had to restake them all with bamboo stakes because the majority of them were blown over. So I wasn't really all that sure whether or not they would recover, because some of them were partially uprooted. But despite all of these troubles that my pepper plants went through, they look absolutely fantastic now, and I want to take you around this pepper bed to show you just how healthy they are here in the beginning of October after being almost dead as a doornail in August. These are hot sunset banana peppers, and there is just fruit everywhere. There's hundreds of peppers here, and I've been picking probably about half a dozen of these every single night, or there would be even more. And then over here, this row of peppers inside, these are actually sweet banana peppers. You can see them all hanging inside here. Here I have lots and lots of cherry peppers. These are all new. They were pretty much dead come the end of August. They were not looking good at all. I also have this is a pepper called New Mex Big Jim. These plants didn't have one single pepper left on them. You can see the New Mex Big Jims are they're all the way up here, all throughout this one plant. I have another New Mex Big Jim over here on the other side that is equally as impressive and loaded with large 6-inch fruits. You can see them all hanging down here. Then I have my jalapeno peppers. I have plenty of them. Before the hurricane, I actually picked my last bit of jalapeno peppers. I had none left on any of these plants, and now we look at them now. Well, we'll just say I have quite a bit of them now. I also have Peperoncini peppers. That's what these are. These plants were picked bare before the hurricane came, and you can see how they're loading up with fruits. There must be hundreds of them. They're everywhere, and you can see how thick and lush this canopy of peppers are. It just looks great. I'm very happy with that. And remember, these were almost all dead. A mere month ago, they were looking pretty terrible. Now they are just vibrant, and they look great. Here are the sweet bananas. You can see how prolific they are. And now I have more peppers than I know what to do with. So now I want to take this time and tell you how I went about doing this. In order to completely understand plants, you have to understand what the function is of every single plant. Every single plant in nature, its goal is to reproduce. And your vegetables and fruits are no different. Every single one of them tries to reproduce before it dies. And that is what the fruiting cycle is. The fruiting cycle is the plant's ability to produce seeds that it can then scatter upon the earth to make offspring. So pepper plants can be refreshed by tricking it out of its cycle. Near the end of the year, the pepper plants produced very heavily. I harvested them, and then the pepper plants said, hey, you know, we just produced a ton of fruit, millions of seeds, it's probably all over the ground, it's probably spread throughout the earth, our life cycle is done, we can die now. Well, a way you can trick a plant out of that life cycle and to stop it from dying back is to cut the plant back physically and then give it a higher nitrogen fertilizer. Nitrogen fertilizer, which is the first number in the NPK on a box of fertilizer that I'll get into later, establishes green growth throughout a plant. It will establish your leaves and it will establish your branches. So if you cut back a plant like a pepper and then you hit it with a high nitrogen fertilizer, you trick it back into establishing a new fruiting cycle, and it gets tricked out of its natural timeline. So what I did was I went through my pepper plants and I cut them all back heavily. It may be hard to see here, but all of these new flowers that you see here, they're all established on new shoots because I came by at the end of August and I cut my pepper plants all back into a goblet style, sort of like this. If you imagine my hand as the trunk of the pepper plant, I cut them all back kind of like this to where all the branches coming out were new stems to bloom suckers out of. So all of my pepper plants used to be very tall, but I went through and I cut the tops off of all of my branches. And from those tops is where you're getting all of these new green growths that shoot out of it. Here's another example of where I trimmed off one of the pepper stems and I only left it maybe about 4 or 5 inches long. And from that pepper stem, you can see all of these new suckers came off of it. And now you have all of these nice new green leaves that come out of shoots where you cut off the stem. The hormones from the tree will travel up. It will stop. It'll say, hey, there used to be a branch there. Where did it go? Oh no. And then it'll create new side growth off of that shoot. So simply by cutting all of your plants back, you can interrupt the natural timeline of a late season pepper that is trying to die back, and you can trick it into wanting to establish new growth. From there, we have to move on to the proper fertilization practices in order to get it to establish lots of new stem and leafy growth. And I'm going to explain that to you next. Alright, now that we've cut back all of our pepper plants and they're ready to start shooting off new side growth and begin the growth cycle again, we have to fertilize them very heavily so they have enough food in order to get over the stress of the heavy pruning and to create new green growth and new fruits. Now I have 3 different fertilizers in front of me that I use to rejuvenate my plants. On the right here, this is an organic all-purpose slow-release fertilizer, and the 2 on the left are soluble fertilizers that do not need to be broken down by natural soil biology. The 2 on the left are chemical fertilizers, and once you mix them with water, the nutrients in those fertilizers are instantly available for those plants to uptake, whereas the fertilizer on the right needs to be slowly broken down by soil microbes, earthworms, and things like that in order to decompose into nitrogen, phosphorus, and potassium that the plants naturally need to uptake. So here I have an all-purpose fertilizer from Job's, and this all-purpose fertilizer, and every fertilizer you buy, will have a number on it. It'll have 3 different numbers. This is a 444. The first number is parts nitrogen, and nitrogen stimulates green leafy growth and stem growth. The second number is phosphorus. Phosphorus stimulates root growth, flowering, and fruiting. And the final number is potassium, and potassium enhances the overall vigor of the plant. This is what's responsible for the plant's metabolic rate and cellular division. So all chemical reactions inside the plant need to be supported by potassium. So when you add these 3 things together, those are the macronutrients that plants consume. Just like we consume as humans fat, carbohydrate, and protein, their main macronutrients are nitrogen, phosphorus, and potassium. So this is very balanced. These balanced 444 and 555 fertilizers are good for pretty much every single plant out there because they don't have an overabundance of anything. So since this is balanced, the first thing I did was irrigate my soil and then place the slow release all over the place. So every single plant will get roughly about 2 tablespoons of slow release fertilizer. Then you wet that down, and that takes several weeks to break down and will give your plants a continuous stream of a little bit of energy along with trace micronutrients. These 2 are the heavy hitters. These are very rapid release, powerful chemical fertilizers. And your Miracle-Gro tomato, I'll zoom in right here. This is an analysis of 18% nitrogen, 18% phosphorus, and 21% potash, which is your potassium. So this is roughly 4 to 5 times as powerful as the organic slow release granulated fertilizer. So the reason why I like Miracle-Gro tomato is because 18-18-21 is almost a 1-to-1-to-1 ratio. It's very, very balanced. So it has lots of nitrogen, it has lots of potassium, and it has lots of phosphorus. So it's good for overall health of a plant. The problem that some fertilizers have is many fertilizers, it's very cheap to add nitrogen to fertilizers, so many fertilizers have way too much nitrogen, and the nitrogen will encourage the plant to only grow leaves and stems, and all the energy will go to green growth, and then you won't get any fruiting. I don't like high nitrogen fertilizers for that point. As you can see, the instructions for this fertilizer clearly state to feed every 7 to 14 days. Under normal circumstances, I feed my plants roughly every 10 days. But because I cut my plants back so hard and they were in such bad shape, I decided to feed them more heavily, and I fed them every 7 days. So, for the first 2 weeks, I gave my plants feedings every 7 days of this Miracle-Gro tomato product. And because it has so much nitrogen and is fairly balanced, the plants immediately started to take off, and they started to show nice new green leafy growth once again. And after a solid 2 weeks, they had new shoots and new stems everywhere. At that point, I wanted to start to encourage the plants to start blooming for flowers and then fruit set. And that is when I switched over to the Miracle-Gro Flower Food Bloom Booster. Now, the analysis on Bloom Booster is very different. Bloom Booster has 15% nitrogen, 30% phosphate, and 15% potash, which is your potassium. And because it is so high in phosphorus, that grows your roots, and that grows your blooms and your fruits. So my plants were mature and already had strong root systems. I knew they're pretty much root bound. The roots aren't going to grow anymore. So they're going to take this phosphorus and they're going to apply it all into blooms, which I need to make my peppers. So starting on the third week, I was able to start giving them this bloom booster instead. And then once I gave them the bloom booster, I noticed a huge uptick in flowering. So again, my first 2 feedings were with the tomato, and then my next 2 feedings were with the bloom booster. Now, because my plants started getting in better shape after the first 2 weeks, I was able to reduce my feeding frequency from every 7 days to every 10 days. So I gave this on day 1 and day 8, and then roughly this on day 18 and day 28. And when I was able to combine all of those things together, I was able to now be where I am now. So roughly 30 days later, I have all of this incredible growth on my plants, incredible numbers of blooms, and incredible numbers of peppers. So everything worked out absolutely incredibly perfectly. And I'm going to take you back into my garden and show you a really easy way to apply all of this fertilizer. Now, before you apply any fertilizer down, I like to hose off the soil very, very lightly to get the soil to start percolating. Throughout the day, the sun bakes the top inch or 2 of soil and it becomes almost concrete-like. So if you just go ahead and give your plants a little watering, you won't get that pooling effect that you'll get once you apply the fertilizer, because otherwise the fertilizer may run off your plants. So it's a good thing to get the ground percolating first. And yes, I also know that you're not supposed to splash your plants and hand water them like I am, but these are end of season peppers and my disease pressure is pretty low right now since we're getting into the cool season, so I'm not being as hard on my practices right now. Now that the ground has been moistened, I'm going to apply the 444 slow release fertilizer, and generally you only need to apply this about every 14 days or so. So we're about 30 days in, maybe a little bit more. So all you have to do is just sprinkle this lightly, about a tablespoon under every single plant. And because these root systems are so advanced, you don't have to worry about getting it exactly underneath every single plant, because believe me when I tell you, all of the ground here is roots. So as long as you get it on the earth, the roots will pick it up. So just take a few handfuls and toss your granulated slow release fertilizer back towards the plants. And it's that easy to apply this stuff. Alright, now that we applied our slow release fertilizer, we are going to apply the soluble quick release fertilizer. Now once again, I have 2 different types here. I have Miracle-Gro Tomato, which is balanced, and I have the Bloom Booster Flower Food, which is a high phosphorus bloom boosting formula. So you have to ask yourself now, what is the best product to apply? If you recall from earlier, my first 2 applications were with the balanced tomato fertilizer, and my next 2 applications were with the bloom boosting fertilizer to create more fruit. Now, as you can clearly see here, I have more fruit than I know what to do with. So you have to ask yourself, what is the appropriate fertilizer in order for you to maintain healthy growth? If you didn't have a whole lot of fruit, you'd probably want to go with the bloom booster, but now that I clearly do not need more blooms and more fruiting, and most of these fruits will carry me to the end of the season, which is roughly in mid to late November for me, I'm going to switch back to the Miracle-Gro Tomato. And I'm going to observe my plants and see how they do. If I find that I'm having issues setting fruit, then I'll have to go back to Bloom Booster. But for now, I think the balanced approach is best. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to apply this. Now, typically with a soluble fertilizer, you're going to place that in a watering can, and you're going to manually water all of your plants. That's what most people do. The best way to do it is to apply it with drip irrigation and to mix everything in one giant barrel and pump it out in your drip lines. Obviously, I don't have that, and I also don't feel like getting a watering can in and trying to water every single one of these plants. But what we do know is that one watering can full would water about 5 plants. So all we have to do is take one application, which is one of these 1.5 tablespoon scoopers that come with your Miracle-Gro, and we know that one level tablespoon and a half will fill 1.5 gallon watering can that would then water 5 plants. So all I'm going to do is I'm just going to disperse this right at each plant at the base, and each scooper will do 5 plants. Here you can clearly see where I place the soluble Miracle-Gro at the base of each plant, and this is a really lazy way to apply your fertilizer, because it just involves putting about 1/2 teaspoon to 3/4 teaspoon of soluble feed at the base of each plant, and then you just water it in after, and you water it in very well so it disperses inside the soil very evenly, and that's just like pouring it out of a watering can, but without all of the lifting and the struggling and the aiming of a watering can. Some of you may be saying, oh, that's crazy, you can't apply fertilizer like that, you're going to burn up your plants. I've been applying fertilizer like this in my earth beds all spring, all summer, and into the fall, and it's been absolutely fine. I've had really good results. You just have to make sure not to over apply your fertilizer. Again, you're only putting about 1/2 teaspoon to 3/4 teaspoon per plant, and you have to water them in very well, and you have to continuously water your plants so you do not get big salt buildup in your soil, because these are chemical salts. So don't over apply, don't apply too much, and water in deep, and you're going to have a similar effect as watering them in with a watering can without any of the back-breaking labor. And there you have it. The soluble fertilizer has been watered in very deeply, and that's all there is to it. Using effective pruning and fertilizing technique, I was able to take my end-of-life dying pepper plants, rejuvenate them, and breathe new life into them all over again, even throughout a hurricane. Everyone, thank you all so much for watching this video. I hope you found it helpful. If you did, please comment, like, and share. For all of the products that I used in this video, they are featured in the description below and also in my Amazon storefront, so feel free to check them out. If you have any other questions, please ask them in the comment section below. Thank you all so much for watching. If you haven't already, please subscribe to the channel, and I hope to see you all again next time.